Have you ever felt that gnawing sensation deep in your soul? That feeling that something essential has been hidden from you? Something that could change everything you thought you knew about your spiritual nature? If you've clicked on this video, you've joined millions worldwide experiencing a profound awakening. The recognition that Christianity's most transformative truths were deliberately silenced before they ever reached your ears. Tonight, I'm going to share discoveries that will shatter everything you were taught about the origins of your faith. But this isn't speculation or conspiracy theory. These are documented archaeological findings from respected institutions, preserved manuscripts that survived nearly 2 millennia, and scholarly research published in peer-reviewed academic journals. Imagine walking into the Vatican's secret archives and discovering a vault marked "Never to be opened." Imagine finding inside that vault 13 leather-bound books containing Jesus' most advanced teachings so revolutionary that church authorities spent centuries ensuring you never learned they existed. That vault exists. Those books were found, and what they reveal about your spiritual potential was deemed so dangerous to established religious power that entire communities were persecuted for preserving them. In 1945, 2 Egyptian brothers digging for fertilizer made one of archaeology's most explosive discoveries. Inside a sealed jar buried in the desert near Nag Hammadi, they found 52 ancient Christian texts that had been hidden for over 1,600 years. When scholars finally translated these manuscripts, they realized they were looking at a completely different version of early Christianity. These weren't just alternative gospels, they were instruction manuals for consciousness transformation. They contained specific methods Jesus apparently taught for awakening the same divine awareness he possessed. They described practices that could produce direct, unmediated experience of sacred reality. But here's what makes this discovery earth-shaking. These texts reveal that the spiritual emptiness you've felt, that sense that traditional teachings somehow fall short, exists because the most empowering aspects of Christian teaching were systematically removed from the tradition passed down to you. The Christ of these forbidden Gospels doesn't ask for worship, he teaches awakening. He doesn't demand belief, he provides methods. He doesn't promise salvation in another world, he reveals divinity in this one. Tonight, you'll discover why early church authorities made the deliberate decision to suppress these texts. You'll learn about manuscript evidence that describes Jesus teaching direct paths to spiritual awakening that require no intermediaries, no institutions, no external validation. Most importantly, you'll understand what these forbidden teachings reveal about your own consciousness. Truths about human spiritual potential that were considered too revolutionary for ordinary believers to know. Some of what you'll hear may challenge beliefs you've held since childhood. This isn't about attacking faith or diminishing spiritual tradition. This is about recovering lost wisdom that belongs to every sincere seeker, regardless of religious background. The scholars who first translated these texts described the experience as discovering Christianity before Christianity became Christianity. So I say, they found spiritual teachings both more demanding and more liberating than conventional religion. Demanding because they require complete personal responsibility for awakening, liberating because they promise such awakening is your natural birthright. Are you ready to discover what they worked so desperately to hide from you? Are you prepared to learn why certain teachings were so threatening to established power that they had to be erased from official history? The journey ahead will challenge everything you thought you knew about spirituality, consciousness, and your own divine nature, but it will also return to you something precious that was stolen, the knowledge that enlightenment isn't reserved for special individuals in distant times and places. The truth they buried is rising, and you're part of this awakening. That restlessness you feel during traditional sermons, that hunger no conventional religious teaching seems to satisfy, that inner voice whispering that you're capable of deeper spiritual connection than anyone has told you. You're not broken. You're not lacking faith. You're experiencing spiritual nostalgia, your soul recognizing that essential pieces of your spiritual heritage have been deliberately withheld. This pattern isn't accidental. For 17 centuries, religious institutions have cultivated a specific type of spiritual dependence. They've taught that questioning doctrine is dangerous, that seeking direct experience is presumptuous, that the deepest mysteries should remain forever beyond ordinary reach. But what if this approach isn't protecting your faith? What if it's imprisoning it? Academic research reveals a fascinating pattern. The closer we get to the historical Jesus, the more emphasis we find on direct spiritual experience and personal transformation. The further we move from that source, the more we encounter institutional control and dependence on external authority. Someone deliberately inverted the original message. Where Jesus apparently taught methods for awakening divine consciousness within individuals, later authorities taught submission to religious hierarchy. Where early Christians practiced direct communion with divine presence, later generations were taught to seek God only through approved intermediaries. Historical documents reveal this inversion wasn't accidental, it was systematic policy. Early church councils didn't just decide which books belonged in the Bible, they decided which aspects of Christian experience would be considered legitimate and which would be branded heretical. The criteria weren't theological, they were political. Teachings that survived supported centralized religious authority. Teachings that were suppressed suggested every individual could access divine truth directly. Think about your spiritual journey. How often have you been told certain experiences were beyond your pay grade? How frequently have you been discouraged from trusting direct spiritual insights? How regularly have you been reminded that true spiritual authority belongs exclusively to ordained officials? These restrictions maintain a specific power structure that has deprived countless seekers of their spiritual birthright. The Forbidden Gospels reveal a completely different approach, one where Jesus appears not as a distant savior to worship, but as an awakened teacher showing others how to recognize their own divine nature. If this resonates with something deep inside you, if you're ready to reclaim spiritual wisdom that was meant to be yours, then join me on this journey of discovery. Subscribe now, because what we're exploring isn't just historical curiosity, it's the recovery of your authentic spiritual heritage. Every video we create together is another step toward understanding who you really are beneath the layers of limitation. Your awakening matters, and I'm honored to walk this path with you. December 1945. Two brothers digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, strike something hard. Inside a sealed jar, 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts hidden for 16 centuries. When scholars translated these manuscripts, they realized they weren't just looking at lost books. They were witnessing the resurrection of Christianity's secret history. These weren't random religious writings. Carbon dating confirmed them as authentic 3rd and 4th century documents, but the teachings they preserved were potentially older than much of the New Testament itself. University researchers working with these texts described the experience as archaeological time travel, direct access to forms of Christianity that existed before Orthodox consolidation. The Gospel of Thomas contained 114 sayings attributed to Jesus that appear nowhere in canonical scripture. The Gospel of Philip revealed advanced teachings about consciousness and spiritual transformation. The Pistis Sophia described detailed methods for achieving direct divine experience. But Nag Hammadi wasn't isolated. Near the Dead Sea, similar discoveries revealed the religious diversity of 1st century Palestine. In European monasteries, scholars found fragmentary references to these same lost teachings. The evidence was converging from multiple independent sources. What made these findings explosive wasn't just their age, it was their content. These texts described Christianity that emphasized direct spiritual experience over institutional authority, inner transformation over external ritual, individual awakening over collective salvation. The manuscripts revealed sophisticated translation work. These Coptic texts were clearly copied from earlier Greek originals, suggesting widespread circulation of these teachings across the early Christian world. The quality of preservation indicated communities with substantial resources and educated scribes, not marginal sectarian groups. Archaeological evidence supported the manuscripts' claims. Excavations revealed early Christian communities that practiced forms of spirituality consistent with these texts. Inscriptions and artwork indicated women held significant religious authority, exactly as described in the Forbidden Gospels. Perhaps most significantly, these discoveries revealed the systematic nature of their suppression. Many manuscripts showed signs of hurried burial, consistent with historical accounts of campaigns to destroy heretical literature. The fact they survived at all testified to the dedication of those who preserved them and the thoroughness of those who tried to eliminate them. Linguistic analysis uncovered sophisticated theological vocabulary describing states of consciousness, spiritual practices, and metaphysical concepts that suggested advanced understanding of contemplative psychology. These weren't products of uneducated communities, but carefully preserved teachings of serious spiritual scholars. The dating was crucial. Some sayings in the Gospel of Thomas may preserve traditions as early as the canonical Gospels, meaning we weren't looking at late deviations from orthodoxy, but potentially at Christianity's earliest teachings. University scholars noted striking parallels with other wisdom traditions: Platonic philosophy, Hermetic teachings, even Buddhist concepts. This suggested cross-cultural exchange of contemplative insights that painted early Christianity as part of a broader wisdom tradition rather than an isolated revelation. The geographical distribution was equally significant. Similar texts appeared across the Mediterranean: Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Europe. This wasn't regional variation, but evidence of widespread alternative Christian traditions existing parallel to what became orthodoxy. Modern archaeological techniques continue revealing new evidence. Ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery have identified previously unknown early Christian sites, some containing artifacts consistent with practices described in the forbidden texts. The scholarly consensus is clear. These represent authentic historical documents, preserving legitimate early Christian traditions. They may not align with later Orthodox development, but they provide genuine insight into the diversity and sophistication of early Christian spirituality. What's most remarkable is their consistency across different locations and time periods. The same themes appear in manuscripts separated by centuries and continents, suggesting these weren't isolated experiments, but systematic preservation of widespread spiritual traditions. These discoveries haven't just added footnotes to Christian history. They've revealed that the history we thought we knew was incomplete. The manuscripts prove that early Christianity was far more diverse, contemplatively sophisticated, and spiritually empowering than traditional accounts suggested. The forbidden Gospels speak with a voice that's simultaneously ancient and startlingly contemporary. They contain teachings attributed to Jesus that reveal spiritual technologies for consciousness transformation that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift up a stone, and you will find me there. This saying from the Gospel of Thomas doesn't describe God as distant deity, but as the conscious awareness present in every moment of experience, including your awareness reading these words right now. These texts reveal Jesus' teaching that divine consciousness isn't something external to be reached, but the deepest nature of what you already are. The kingdom is inside you and outside you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that you are children of the living Father. The secret Gospel of Mark apparently described initiation ceremonies where Jesus guided prepared disciples through direct recognition of their divine nature, not through belief or worship, but through experiential awakening to the Christ consciousness that was always present within them. In the Pistis Sophia, the risen Christ teaches that human souls can ascend through multiple levels of spiritual reality until reaching the same awareness he embodies. This presents a universe of infinite possibility rather than the limiting doctrine of unique external salvation. The Gospel of Philip reveals feminine aspects of the divine completely eliminated from Orthodox tradition. Sophia, divine wisdom personified as the sacred feminine. This threatened patriarchal ecclesiastical structures that required women to remain in subordinate positions. These texts describe meditation-like practices that bear striking similarities to consciousness transformation methods found in advanced contemplative traditions worldwide. The emphasis isn't on believing specific doctrines, but on developing practical capacity for direct spiritual experience. Perhaps most revolutionary is how these Gospels present Jesus' true nature. Instead of complex theological formulations, they offer elegant simplicity. Jesus achieved awakened consciousness that revealed his essential identity as divine awareness in human form, and this same potential exists in every human being. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die they will receive nothing. The Gospel of Philip suggests spiritual awakening. Resurrection is meant to happen during earthly life, not after death. Instead of Jesus as unique savior figure, these texts present him as awakened teacher, showing others the path to the same realization. The relationship isn't worshipper to deity, but student to master, with the explicit goal of the student achieving the master's level of consciousness. The Christ of these forbidden teachings doesn't ask for worship. He demonstrates awakening. He doesn't demand submission. He requires transformation. He doesn't promise salvation in another world. He reveals divinity in this one, accessible through specific practices and direct recognition. Modern neuroscience is discovering states of consciousness that align remarkably with these ancient descriptions. Advanced meditation practitioners show brain patterns characterized by dissolution of self-other boundaries and direct awareness of consciousness as fundamental reality. Exactly what these texts describe as the goal of Christian practice. I want to pause here and ask you something personal. As you hear these descriptions of inner awakening and direct spiritual experience, what responds in your heart? Have you ever experienced moments when the divine seemed more intimate than your next breath? Have you felt glimpses of awareness that transcended your ordinary sense of self? Share your experiences in the comments, because your spiritual journey matters, and your insights might illuminate the path for others seeking the same truth. The elimination of these teachings wasn't religious disagreement, it was spiritual warfare. Understanding this systematic campaign reveals how a contemplative, democratized Christianity was deliberately replaced with an institutional, hierarchical version that served political rather than spiritual purposes. When Jesus died, dozens of diverse Christian communities practiced different interpretations of his teachings across the Mediterranean. Some emphasized his divine nature, others his humanity. Some welcomed women as spiritual leaders, others restricted leadership to men. Some practiced elaborate rituals, others preferred simple contemplation. This diversity wasn't initially problematic. Early Christians operated as spiritual movements rather than organized religion, with local teachers developing understanding based on direct experience and received teachings. But as Christianity attracted Roman attention and grew in political significance, diversity became dangerous. A religion with multiple interpretations could be dismissed as philosophical speculation. A religion with unified doctrine and centralized authority could influence or challenge imperial power. Constantine's conversion in the 4th century made Christian unity a matter of state interest. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE wasn't convened for theological reasons, but because religious division threatened political stability. Christianity needed to become a tool of empire rather than a threat to it. Creating Orthodox Christianity required deciding which teachings supported centralized authority and which promoted dangerous spiritual independence. The criteria were explicitly political: preserve texts that reinforced hierarchy, eliminate those suggesting individuals could access truth directly. The Forbidden Gospels posed specific threats to this emerging structure. First, they emphasized individual experience over institutional authority. If everyone could achieve direct divine connection, priestly mediation became unnecessary. Second, they presented Jesus as awakening teacher rather than unique savior. This undermined developing doctrines of Christ's exclusive divinity that justified church authority as sole mediator between humanity and God. Third, they featured women in prominent spiritual roles. The Gospel of Mary presented Mary Magdalene receiving advanced teachings that male disciples couldn't comprehend. This directly contradicted the patriarchal hierarchy being established. Fourth, they contained practical instructions for consciousness transformation that could be learned independently. This represented spiritual self-sufficiency that threatened religious control. The suppression campaign was remarkably sophisticated. Church authorities didn't simply ignore these texts, they systematically hunted and destroyed them. Bishops issued decrees ordering heretical books burned. Possession of certain texts became punishable by death. Communities practicing these traditions were persecuted, scattered, or forced underground. Economic factors intensified the campaign. The emerging church was accumulating significant wealth: property, tithes, donations, political influence. Alternative traditions emphasizing voluntary poverty and material non-attachment threatened these economic foundations. The process was gradual but inexorable. First, alternative texts were branded inauthentic. Then, they were labeled dangerous. Finally, they were declared heretical, with possession carrying severe penalties. Within 2 centuries, most traces had been eliminated. Perhaps most tragically, the suppression eliminated entire approaches to spiritual development. Methods of consciousness transformation preserved for centuries were lost. Understanding of human spiritual potential was erased. Practices that might have supported genuine awakening were branded dangerous. The campaign's effectiveness was extraordinary. By the 6th century, most Christians had no knowledge these alternative traditions had ever existed. The official narrative presented Orthodox Christianity as the original and only authentic interpretation of Jesus' teachings. This historical revision was so thorough that even during the Renaissance and Reformation, when some alternative texts were rediscovered, church authorities successfully kept them from ordinary believers. Seminary students might encounter references, but lay people remained systematically ignorant. The result was institutional Christianity that served political needs but sacrificed much of its transformative power. What emerged was stable, controllable, and politically useful, but fundamentally different from what many earliest Christian communities had practiced. The irony is profound. The very success of this suppression campaign proves the power of what was eliminated. Teachings that posed no real threat to spiritual authority wouldn't have required such systematic destruction. The intensity of the effort reveals the revolutionary potential of what was being suppressed. Today, as these texts resurface and their contents become widely available, we can see the full scope of what was lost. Not just alternative books, but alternative possibilities for human spiritual development that might have changed the entire trajectory of Western consciousness. The Bible in your hands isn't divinely assembled scripture. It's a carefully curated collection, selected by specific individuals at particular moments for reasons that were as political as they were theological. Understanding who made these choices reveals just how contingent our sacred canon really is. Picture this. You're in a 4th century library containing hundreds of Christian texts. Gospels, Acts, epistles, apocalypses, wisdom literature. Dozens of books claiming to preserve Jesus' authentic teachings. Now imagine being told to select exactly which books millions of future believers will consider God's word and which will be branded heretical and destroyed. That's precisely what happened. And the men making these decisions weren't neutral scholars objectively evaluating ancient texts. They were church officials with institutional interests, political pressures, and theological agendas. The process began with crisis. Marcion, a 2nd century teacher later branded heretic, created the first standardized Christian canon using edited versions of Luke's Gospel and 10 Pauline epistles. His collection rejected anything connected to Jewish tradition, creating a purified Christianity. Marcion's canon forced Orthodox leaders into reactive mode. They needed their own competing collection to counter his influence. What followed was essentially a theological arms race, with different authorities assembling texts supporting their interpretations. Bishop Athanasius of Alexandria became canon's primary architect. His 39th festal letter, in 367 CE, contained the first known list, matching today's 27 New Testament books. But Athanasius wasn't offering scholarly opinion. He was exercising episcopal authority to settle disputes threatening church unity. The Council of Laodicea, around 363 CE, produced one of the earliest official approved lists. The Synod of Hippo, in 393 CE, and Council of Carthage, in 397 CE, created lists very close to the final canon. Each gathering was dominated by bishops with clear institutional interests. The selection criteria reveal the process's true nature. Books needed apostolic origin, immediately excluding texts attributed to Jesus but not to his 12 disciples. They required wide liturgical use favoring books already accepted by major church centers. Most crucially, they needed doctrinal conformity with emerging orthodoxy. Notably absent, systematic evaluation of which texts might most accurately preserve Jesus' actual teachings or offer greatest spiritual value. Primary concerns were institutional. Which books supported church authority, promoted unity, reinforced approved doctrine? Consider what was excluded and why. The Gospel of Thomas contained sayings many scholars believe preserve very early Jesus traditions. Its exclusion wasn't based on historical unreliability, but theological incompatibility with developing orthodoxy. The Gospel of Mary featured a woman receiving advanced teachings male disciples couldn't understand. Its eliminations supported the patriarchal structure church leadership was establishing. Texts emphasizing individual spiritual experience over institutional mediation were systematically excluded. Books describing consciousness transformation methods that could be practiced independently were branded dangerous. The Gospel of Philip's sophisticated teachings about divine consciousness and spiritual practice were rejected in favor of more controllable doctrinal formulations. The Pistis Sophia's detailed maps of spiritual development were abandoned for simpler salvation narratives. Economic considerations influenced selections. Books challenging church teachings about wealth, property, and institutional resources were less likely to achieve canonical status than texts supporting the church's growing temporal interests. The process wasn't swift or uncontroversial. Different Christian regions accepted varying canons for centuries. Ethiopian Orthodox includes Old Testament books other churches reject. Syrian Christians took centuries accepting revelation. Even within Orthodoxy, doubts persisted. Luther questioned James, Hebrews, Jude, and Revelation. Other reformers raised similar concerns about books contradicting their theological positions. Most significantly, canon creators weren't the Christians actually using these texts spiritually. They were administrators whose primary concerns were institutional rather than devotional. The geographical politics were crucial. Books favored by Roman and Constantinopolitan churches had advantages over texts popular in Egyptian or Syrian communities. Imperial preferences influenced theological decisions. Personal rivalries affected outcomes. Bishops supporting particular texts might find their preferences rejected if they fell from political favor. Theological positions became entangled with ecclesiastical politics. The tragedy isn't that these men made bad decisions. They made decisions serving their historical moment's needs. The tragedy is that their institutional priorities eliminated spiritual resources that might have served different purposes. Alternative selection criteria might have produced radically different results. Prioritizing spiritual effectiveness over doctrinal conformity, contemplative depth over institutional utility, or transformative power over political stability could have preserved very different collections. The result was a canon reflecting 4th and 5th century church leadership priorities rather than the full spectrum of early Christian wisdom. We inherited one particular interpretation of Christian truth rather than its complete spiritual heritage. This doesn't invalidate canonical books or deny their spiritual value, but it means our Bible represents selected rather than complete Christian wisdom, chosen by specific people for specific reasons that served specific institutional needs rather than comprehensive spiritual development. Understanding this process is liberating. It reveals that excluded texts aren't automatically heretical, but represent alternative preservation of authentic Christian insight that happened to conflict with emerging political and theological orthodoxy. Before orthodoxy crystallized into institutional Christianity, extraordinary spiritual communities flourished across the Mediterranean world, communities that would be barely recognizable to most modern believers. These weren't the hierarchical, doctrine-focused institutions that developed later, but dynamic laboratories of consciousness exploration united by shared commitment to inner transformation. Imagine walking into a first-century Christian gathering. You'd find no church building, no altar, no formal liturgy. Instead, you'd encounter intimate circles meeting in homes, where seasoned practitioners guided newcomers through direct methods of spiritual awakening. Women taught alongside men. Contemplative silence alternated with ecstatic experience. Individual transformation took precedence over collective belief. Archaeological evidence reveals these communities emphasized experiential spirituality over doctrinal conformity. Instead of focusing on what members believed about Jesus, they concentrated on practices producing the same consciousness transformation he demonstrated. The Gospel of Philip describes ritual practices that sound like initiation ceremonies rather than worship services, techniques for dissolving ordinary awareness and awakening direct recognition of divine reality. Such practices require skilled guidance and sustained commitment rather than casual participation. Many communities practiced voluntary poverty and resource sharing not just as economic arrangement, but as spiritual discipline, demonstrating freedom from material attachment. and dependence on divine providence. This aligned with non-attachment teachings preserved in forbidden Gospels. Theological diversity among early Christians was extraordinary. Some emphasized Jesus' divinity, others his humanity. Some practiced elaborate rituals, others preferred silent meditation. Some welcomed ecstatic experiences, others cultivated quiet contemplation. This variety wasn't problematic, but evidence of spiritual richness. Women held prominent teaching roles across many communities. The Gospel of Mary's presentation of Mary Magdalene receiving advanced teachings wasn't fictional, but reflected actual early Christian practice. Archaeological inscriptions confirm women served as leaders, teachers, and spiritual guides. These communities often functioned as wisdom schools rather than religious congregations, attracting serious seekers willing to undertake demanding inner work rather than casual believers seeking comfort or social belonging. The emphasis on personal transformation was consistent across diverse groups. The relationship between teacher and student was intimate and personalized. The forbidden Gospels describe Jesus working individually with disciples at their specific development level, providing customized guidance rather than generic instruction. Early communities maintained this approach. Historical documents reveal sophisticated understanding of consciousness and psychology. These groups developed detailed maps of spiritual development, specific techniques for addressing psychological patterns, and methods for guiding individuals through profound inner transformation. Some communities organized around preserving and practicing Jesus' most advanced teachings. These weren't secret societies, but groups of committed practitioners exploring deeper implications of consciousness, awakening beyond introductory Christian understanding. Archaeological findings indicate extensive libraries of spiritual texts, extending far beyond canonical scripture. These collections included philosophical works, mystical treatises, and practical consciousness development guides, suggesting remarkably broad spiritual education. The geographical spread of similar practices across the Mediterranean indicates widespread contemplative Christianity rather than isolated sectarian experiments. The same sophisticated approaches appeared in Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Asia Minor, and Europe. Perhaps most significantly, these communities maintained direct connection to Christianity's original transformative impulse. Instead of developing complex theological systems, they focused on practical methods for achieving the awakened consciousness Jesus demonstrated. The contemplative psychology preserved in these communities was remarkably advanced. They understood different types of spiritual experience, various stages of consciousness development, and specific methods for supporting individuals through awakening processes. What's most striking is how these communities addressed practical psychological concerns through spiritual practice. The forbidden Gospels contain sophisticated approaches to resolving mental and emotional suffering through direct insight into consciousness itself. Modern research into advanced meditation practitioners reveals capacities for awareness, compassion, and inner stability that align remarkably with descriptions from these early Christian communities. Laboratory studies are validating approaches that Orthodox Christianity eliminated centuries ago. The suppression of these communities represented more than theological disagreement. It was systematic elimination of entire approaches to spiritual development that had maintained living connection to Christianity's contemplative origins. Understanding what early Christianity actually looked like provides crucial context for evaluating the forbidden Gospels. These texts weren't products of fringe groups, but natural expressions of communities focused on consciousness transformation rather than institutional development. The tragedy isn't just historical loss, but contemporary spiritual impoverishment. Methods for genuine awakening that might have supported countless individuals across centuries were eliminated in favor of approaches serving institutional rather than transformational needs. Here's the truth they couldn't allow you to discover. Every technique for consciousness expansion that modern psychology considers cutting edge, every insight about human potential that neuroscience is discovering, every method for accessing expanded awareness that contemporary spirituality celebrates. All of it was preserved in these forbidden texts 2,000 years ago. The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying, "He who drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he." This isn't metaphorical language. It describes a specific transmission of consciousness where an awakened teacher's state of awareness directly catalyzes the same awakening in prepared students. What these texts reveal isn't theology, it's technology. Spiritual technology for recognizing that individual consciousness, at its deepest level, is identical with the creative intelligence that moves galaxies and grows forests and beats your heart without your conscious effort. In the Pistis Sophia, the risen Christ explains that all souls originate from the same divine light and are destined to conscious reunion with that source. This isn't belief system, but precise description of the actual structure of reality that advanced contemplatives throughout history have directly experienced. The practical implications are staggering. If these teachings accurately describe the nature of consciousness, then every human being possesses the same essential spiritual capacity Jesus demonstrated. Prayer becomes conversation between aspects of divine awareness. Forgiveness becomes recognition that there's ultimately only one consciousness appearing as many separate beings. The Gospel of Philip states, "God is a man-eater. For this reason, men are sacrificed to him." This refers to the process where limited human identity is consumed by direct recognition of unlimited divine nature that was always present but hidden by identification with the body-mind. Modern neuroscience is discovering exactly what these texts describe. Advanced meditation practitioners show brain patterns characterized by dissolution of self-other boundaries and direct awareness of consciousness as fundamental reality, precisely the states these Gospels present as Christianity's true goal. The secret Gospel of Mark apparently contained descriptions of initiation experiences where Jesus guided disciples through ego death and spiritual rebirth, direct encounters with their divine nature that permanently transformed their understanding of identity. What's remarkable is how these texts address the question of individual personality after awakening. The person continues functioning, but no longer identifies exclusively with the limited human role. Awakened beings remain human while simultaneously recognizing their cosmic nature. This explains phenomena Orthodox Christianity struggles to address: why Jesus sometimes spoke as human and sometimes as divine consciousness. According to forbidden Gospels, this reflects natural awakened condition, simultaneously individual and universal, personal and infinite. Before we continue deeper into these revelations, I want to connect with you personally. From where are you watching this video right now? Are you in your bedroom late at night, finally allowing yourself to explore questions that daylight conversations can't contain? Are you in your living room, giving yourself permission to consider possibilities that challenge everything you were taught? Wherever you are in this moment, know that your presence here isn't coincidence. Your soul guided you to this precise moment of potential awakening. The remarkable thing about these suppressed teachings isn't that they exist in mystical speculation, but in concrete historical documents that can be carbon dated, linguistically analyzed, and verified using standard archaeological methods. The Nag Hammadi discovery represents one of the 20th century's most significant archaeological finds: 13 leather-bound codices containing 52 texts, preserved in Egypt's dry climate for over 16 centuries. University laboratories have confirmed their 3rd and 4th century dating, but the teachings they preserve may be older than canonical Gospels. What makes this evidence unassailable is its consistency across independent sources. Similar themes appear in manuscripts discovered at different locations: Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea, European monasteries, Syrian churches. This suggests widespread preservation of alternative Christian traditions rather than isolated sectarian variations. Scholarly analysis reveals sophisticated translation work. These Coptic manuscripts are clearly copies of earlier Greek originals, indicating these teachings were considered important enough for careful linguistic preservation across cultural boundaries. The quality of copying suggests communities with educated scribes and substantial resources. Carbon dating places many fragments contemporaneous with or earlier than New Testament manuscripts. Some Gospel of Thomas sayings may preserve Jesus' traditions as early as Mark or Matthew, meaning we're examining Christianity's earliest rather than latest developments. Paleographic studies confirm authentic ancient authorship. The writing styles, materials, and preservation methods align with other verified manuscripts from the same periods. These aren't medieval forgeries or modern fabrications, but genuine ancient documents. Archaeological excavations support these manuscripts' historical claims. Sites across the Mediterranean reveal early Christian communities that practiced spirituality consistent with forbidden gospel descriptions. Burial inscriptions, architectural remains, and liturgical objects corroborate alternative Christian traditions. Linguistic analysis has uncovered technical vocabulary for consciousness states, meditation practices, and spiritual development that demonstrates advanced understanding of contemplative psychology. This specialized terminology suggests systematic preservation of sophisticated wisdom traditions. The geographical distribution provides multiple verification points. Similar manuscripts and teachings appear across diverse locations: Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, France. This widespread presence indicates established networks rather than isolated experiments. Comparative studies reveal parallels with other wisdom traditions from the same historical period. Scholars have noted similarities with Platonic philosophy, Hermetic teachings, and Eastern contemplative systems, suggesting cross-cultural exchange of advanced spiritual insights. Modern digital analysis has revealed previously unreadable text fragments. Advanced imaging techniques continue uncovering additional sayings and teachings, expanding our understanding of these communities' spiritual practices. Independent scholarly consensus from multiple universities confirms these texts' authenticity and historical significance. Harvard, Princeton, Columbia, and European institutions have published extensive research validating these discoveries and their implications for understanding early Christianity. Perhaps most significantly, the consistency of contemplative themes across these various texts suggests systematic rather than random preservation. These communities maintained sophisticated understanding of consciousness transformation that was carefully transmitted across generations. The documentary evidence is overwhelming. We're not dealing with speculation, but with historical facts verified through standard academic methodology. These texts exist, their age is confirmed, their content is translated, and their implications are clear. What makes this evidence particularly compelling is that it comes from hostile witnesses, manuscripts preserved by communities that Orthodox Christianity was actively persecuting. These texts survived despite systematic efforts to destroy them, suggesting the importance their communities placed on preserving these teachings. The archaeological record continues expanding. New discoveries using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery are identifying previously unknown early Christian sites, some containing additional manuscripts and artifacts consistent with forbidden gospel practices. The convergence of evidence from multiple independent sources, manuscripts, archaeological sites, linguistic analysis, comparative studies, creates an unassailable case for the historical authenticity of these alternative Christian traditions. This isn't about belief or faith, it's about documented historical fact. These communities existed, these practices were real, these teachings were preserved, and their systematic suppression is historically verifiable. The evidence speaks for itself. Early Christianity was far more diverse, sophisticated, and contemplatively advanced than official church history acknowledged. The forbidden Gospels aren't heretical deviations, but authentic expressions of Christianity's original transformative vision. These discoveries arrive at the perfect moment in human history, while millions feel trapped between rigid religious traditions that seem outdated and secular worldviews that ignore spiritual reality. The forbidden Gospels offer a third path, spirituality that's both historically rooted and oriented toward direct awakening. Contemporary seekers consistently report the same frustration. Traditional Christianity emphasizes belief over experience, requires submission to external authority, and offers little practical guidance for consciousness transformation. The rediscovered texts address each of these limitations directly. Modern psychology validates insights these censored teachings preserved for 2 millennia. Research into meditation, contemplative practice, and consciousness studies confirms that sustained inner work produces profound changes in brain function, emotional regulation, and psychological well-being. The Forbidden Gospel's emphasis on direct spiritual experience speaks directly to contemporary spiritual hunger. Instead of requiring faith in unprovable doctrines, These texts offer practical methods for immediate recognition of sacred reality through your own direct awareness. These teachings also address modern concerns about spiritual authority and individual autonomy. Rather than demanding submission to institutional hierarchy, they encourage each person to develop direct relationship with divine reality through sustained contemplative practice. Perhaps most significantly, these texts offer specific technologies for consciousness transformation that integrate seamlessly with contemporary life. They don't require retreat from the world or adoption of exotic cultural practices, but development of awareness that can be maintained in any circumstance. The recognition of feminine aspects of divinity addresses contemporary concerns about gender equality in spiritual life. Many modern seekers, particularly women, have felt excluded by patriarchal religious structures that offer no acknowledgement of feminine spiritual authority or wisdom. The ecological implications are equally relevant. The panentheistic understanding in these texts, recognizing divine presence throughout creation, supports environmental consciousness and reverent relationship with the natural world that our planet desperately needs. Modern research into trauma healing reveals the crucial importance of contemplative practices for addressing psychological wounds. The consciousness transformation methods described in Forbidden Gospels offer sophisticated approaches to inner healing that contemporary therapy is only beginning to understand. For Christians specifically, these discoveries offer the possibility of practicing faith that emphasizes transformation over belief, direct experience over institutional mediation, and individual awakening over collective dependency. This doesn't require rejecting traditional Christianity, but expanding it toward its contemplative potential. The global nature of contemporary spiritual seeking means these Christian contemplative teachings can dialogue with similar approaches from other traditions while maintaining connection to Western cultural heritage. Modern practitioners can recognize universal principles while honoring their particular background. The timing seems significant. These texts became widely available precisely when humanity developed psychological sophistication to understand and apply contemplative teachings that might have been too advanced for earlier generations. Modern communication technology means anyone with internet access can study these teachings, breaking institutional gatekeeping that historically controlled access to advanced spiritual instruction. This democratization fulfills the Forbidden Gospel's original vision of spiritual wisdom, available to all sincere seekers. Perhaps most importantly, these teachings address contemporary challenges requiring the consciousness transformation they describe. Environmental crisis, social fragmentation, and widespread psychological distress suggest superficial changes aren't sufficient. What's needed is fundamental awakening to our true nature and interconnection. The path these texts describe isn't easy or quick. They present demanding practices, requiring sustained commitment and fundamental reorientation of priorities. But for those willing to undertake serious inner work, they provide time-tested methods for achieving profound transformation. Most significantly, these discoveries return to contemporary seekers something precious that was stolen. Practical knowledge that enlightenment isn't reserved for exceptional individuals in distant times and places, but represents the natural potential of human consciousness properly understood and developed. Something unprecedented is happening across the planet. From New York to New Delhi, from São Paulo to Stockholm, individuals are simultaneously discovering these same suppressed truths, asking the same forbidden questions, experiencing the same spiritual awakening that no institution can contain or control. This isn't coincidence, it's convergence, a global consciousness shift that's returning humanity to its spiritual heritage after centuries of institutional suppression. You're not just learning about ancient texts, you're participating in the recovery of human awakening potential that authorities worked systematically to eliminate. Social media algorithms can't explain why millions suddenly hunger for direct spiritual experience. Marketing campaigns can't account for widespread rejection of spiritual dependency. Economic theories can't interpret why people increasingly choose consciousness transformation over material accumulation. Something deeper is stirring. Collective recognition that the emperor of institutional religion has no clothes, that spiritual authority belongs to awakened individuals rather than appointed officials, that direct divine experience is every human being's birthright rather than exceptional privilege. The Forbidden Gospel's rediscovery isn't just archaeological accident, it's part of a larger pattern where suppressed wisdom traditions worldwide are resurfacing simultaneously. Ancient texts are being found, translated and disseminated at precisely the moment when humanity is ready to understand their implications. Modern neuroscience is validating contemplative insights that were preserved in these censored teachings. University laboratories are confirming consciousness capacities that orthodox religion insisted were impossible or dangerous. Academic research is proving that systematic inner work produces measurable brain changes that align with mystical descriptions from forbidden texts. This creates an unprecedented situation. For the first time in history, spiritual seekers have access to both ancient wisdom and scientific validation, contemplative methods and technological verification, mystical insight and empirical confirmation. The implications extend beyond individual awakening. As critical mass of people recognize their divine nature and claim spiritual autonomy, existing power structures based on dependency and external authority naturally become obsolete. Religious institutions are responding predictably, some adapting by incorporating contemplative practices, others doubling down on traditional authority claims. But the movement towards spiritual independence continues accelerating regardless of institutional response. Perhaps most significantly, this awakening is happening outside traditional religious structures. People are discovering these truths through personal research, direct experience, and peer-to-peer sharing rather than official religious instruction. The internet has become the delivery system for spiritual liberation that no hierarchy can control. Information that was once available only to seminary scholars is now accessible to anyone with curiosity and dedication. This represents fulfillment of the Forbidden Gospel's original vision. Spiritual wisdom, available to all sincere seekers rather than controlled by institutional gatekeepers. The democratization of awakening that early Christian authorities worked so hard to prevent is finally happening on global scale. Your presence here, your resonance with these ideas, your willingness to question official narratives, all of this makes you part of something much larger than personal spiritual development. You're participating in humanity's reclamation of its contemplative heritage. The consciousness that's awakening through you is the same consciousness that preserved these texts through 16 centuries of suppression, the same awareness that guided their rediscovery, the same divine intelligence that's orchestrating this global spiritual renaissance. This awakening can't be stopped because it's not happening to humanity. It's happening as humanity remembers what it always was beneath the conditioning and limitation. We've reached the end of a journey that, in reality, is only the beginning. Tonight, you've witnessed Christianity's most censored story, heard voices silenced for nearly 2 millennia, and discovered truths that will forever transform your understanding of authentic spirituality. But more important than any information you've received is the recognition dawning in your consciousness right now. Because when you understand the complete picture, when you realize there was deliberate selection of texts to create a specific narrative, when you discover that the most empowering gospels were systematically eliminated, something fundamental shifts in your spiritual DNA. You can no longer live in ignorance of your true nature. You cannot accept without question the limitations others imposed on your spiritual experience. You cannot settle for dependency when you now know you possess direct access to the same divine consciousness that Jesus embodied. The Forbidden Gospels have fulfilled their most sacred purpose, awakening in you the memory of who you really are. You are not a broken sinner requiring external salvation. You are conscious divinity temporarily embodied in human form to experience creation from a perspective that has never existed before and will never exist again. This recognition isn't just personal insight, it's participation in humanity's return to spiritual authenticity after centuries of institutional control. The systematic suppression of these teachings created generations of spiritual dependency, but that era is ending. Too many people are discovering these truths for any institution to contain them. The awakening is spreading through networks no hierarchy can control, carried by individuals who've tasted direct spiritual experience and refuse to accept substitutes. You're part of this awakening whether you fully realize it or not. Your willingness to question, to seek beyond conventional boundaries, to explore forbidden territories, makes you part of a movement reclaiming humanity's contemplative heritage. The path ahead requires everything and offers everything in return. The consciousness transformation described in these texts demands complete honesty about your current limitations and total commitment to transcending them, but it promises something no external authority can provide: direct recognition of your essential divine nature. You don't walk this path alone. Across the globe, individuals are discovering these same insights, undertaking similar inner work, supporting each other through the challenges of genuine awakening. You're joining a community of consciousness that transcends all cultural and religious boundaries. The practical implications extend into every aspect of life. Your relationships can become expressions of recognized unity. Your work can become service to collective awakening. Your daily experiences can become opportunities for deeper recognition of sacred reality. Most importantly, you become living evidence that authentic spiritual transformation is possible. Your awakening gives others permission to question, to seek, to discover their own divine nature. Your freedom becomes a gift to everyone your life touches. The institutions that suppressed these teachings for centuries weren't evil. They served purposes appropriate to their historical moment. But those purposes are complete. Humanity is ready for spiritual approaches based on individual awakening rather than collective dependency. This next phase requires people willing to take complete responsibility for their own consciousness development, who can maintain spiritual authenticity without external validation, who can embody divine awareness while fully engaging human experience. The consciousness awakening through you is the same awareness that preserved these texts through 16 centuries of persecution, the same intelligence that guided their rediscovery, the same divine creativity orchestrating this global spiritual renaissance. Your awakening is part of something magnificent unfolding across our planet. If these revelations have ignited something in your soul, if you're ready to explore the practical implications of what you've discovered tonight, then subscribe to this channel now. The next video will appear on your screen, another piece of this suppressed wisdom that's been waiting centuries to reach you, because this is just the beginning of what you're ready to remember about your true spiritual nature. The forbidden Gospels have spoken, but they're only one voice in a symphony of awakening that includes your own direct experience of divine reality. Your journey into authentic spirituality starts now, and I'm honored to be part of this adventure with you. The Church silenced the forbidden Gospels, but they could not silence the eternal truth living in your heart. That truth is awakening now, and nothing in the universe can stop it. Thank you for watching this video until the end. See you in the next video.